complicat, no? Com per exemple els...
Ha d'estar així, no? O sigui que hem de tornar a començar, eh? Oi? A mi se m'escoltava bé?
Sí, és veritat, perquè no...
Vale, què vols que fem aleshores? L'últim? Vale. Ok, vale. Ok. How do you build the world around the idea? When you have the idea, you have to build a world around it. So where do you start?
Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, normally where I start is I try to find the friction points, the pinch points, where the setting can cause difficulties for my characters, because fiction is, after all, the art of, taking people's lives and ruining them. So, for instance, in these lifeless things, there's these statues, these ugly statues all around the city. Initially, that just seems like part of the world. They actually also form part of the plot. The fact that the streets and the buildings are ripped up, that's important to the plot as well. That provides obstacles for the characters. And as I was mentioning in the previous question, it is very tempting to fill the story with details that have no job, just to add texture and life to the story. But the whole book can't be that, because the novel cannot just be setting. It also has to have the story, and the story has to have motion. And if it's not moving through the world and encountering obstacles through the world, then I haven't done my job.
Ens comenta la Premee parlant d'aquesta construcció del món, que a mi li agrada molt, dins del món que construeix, posar dificultats als personatges, fotre'ls una mica, per dir-ho d'alguna manera, perquè creu que això ajuda a que l'acció avanci, no? I prefereix posar aquestes dificultats que avanci a través dels personatges, que hi hagi elements en el món que no només siguin part pròpiament del món, sinó part de la història, i feia referència, per exemple, a les estàtues d'aquestes coses sense vida, i comentava també, com una resposta anterior, com hi ha una temptació a vegades a farcir la història de molts detalls, per donar potser més textura o més vida a la història, però que en el cas de les novel·les curtes, com aquestes que us presentem, és millor resistir-s'hi, millor seguir fent que el conflicte amb els personatges i no els detalls siguin els que fan avançar la història.
Great. Before you were talking about being replaceable, poor people as being replaceable, and in the first story, they are literally replaceable, aren't they? Because anything can happen to them, even death, which is what happens to one of the characters, but she comes back, which means that she comes back without all the fears she had before, so she can have her revenge and everything. But then there's another character, who's Jewel, that also wants the same things as the dead character, but she has to face her fears too, doesn't she?
Hi ha aquest personatge que en el llibre que podem oferir aquesta nit, parlant dels personatges que deies que resulten prescindibles, amb aquestes diferències entre els privilegiats i els que no ho són, un d'aquests personatges prescindibles torna de la mort, amb la qual ja potser li és igual, ja no té por de res. I l'altre personatge protagonista, en el fons vol ser com ella, no vol tenir por, però per no tenir por ha de superar les seves pròpies pors.
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit of me, actually, in Jewel. I didn't really realize that until I was finishing up the book and running it through my own edits. But, my parents are immigrants, and their big focus in life is that their kids should be safe, should be secure, should get jobs that are, quiet and reliable. They were very happy when I got my government job. And Jewel is like that. She doesn't like to rock the boat, and she thinks the most important thing in her life is to keep her job. And when you think about it, that's almost a ridiculous thing to think. Of course, there are many, many more things important than a job, but to her, there aren't. So almost for the first time in her life, she has to choose between her loyalty to her friends that have become her family, or her loyalty to this job and these awful owners, and the prospect of security. And you know, it outside of the world of the story, that might seem to be an easy choice. I wanted it to be a hard choice for her, though, and for her to grow as a character by the end.
Pel que fa a aquestes pors, la Premee comenta que a mesura que anava editant el text i a mesura que l'anava acabant es va adonar que part d'ella potser era la Jules. No? Ella comentava que els seus pares són immigrants i que una de les grans preocupacions que tenien era que els seus fills, com a fills d'immigrants, allà on van arribar poguessin tenir una vida tranquil·la, una vida segura, cosa que, per exemple, ella l'ha tingut, i sobretot ara últimament que treballava pel govern, el qual era com una cosa més estable. I això es reflecteix en el personatge de Jules, com per ella el més important és mantenir la seva feina. El qual és ridícul per dues bandes, perquè hi ha moltes més coses que la seva feina, i a més aquesta feina ve de part d'uns personatges menyspreables com són els seus jefes. I aquesta necessitat de trobar la seguretat en aquest camp es veu confrontada amb la lleialtat amb els seus companys treballadors, que alhora són els seus amics, i això és el que fa que hagi de triar, i en aquesta tria està la dificultat i en aquesta tria està el creixement.
The basic story is quite dark, actually, but there's lots of hope in the story too, and bravery and optimism in the end, isn't there?
Bé, la història és molt fosca, però també hi trobem amb ella esperança.
Yeah, I hope so. Initially, actually, I was thinking of a much darker ending. So without giving that away, I originally thought it was more intuitive, narratively, for Wynne to give in to her impulses at the end when she seems like she's about to reach her goal. But I thought the hope is that even if the world cannot do better by us, at least we can occasionally do better on a small scale. So I think Jewel feels that, and she's trying to communicate it to Winfield, that even if this brave, hopeful, optimistic act only affects 20 or 30 people, maybe just the people at this party, it's still better than nothing. And I hope that's the message in both stories, is that any good deed is better than nothing.
Sí, de fet pensava, fins i tot havia pensat en donar-li un final més fosc, però me'n vaig adonar en el moment en què estava mirant de veure com Winfield acabaria en aquella festa, com es contraposava amb el que Jules d'alguna manera li volia fer arribar. I el que a la Jules potser li vol fer arribar és que nosaltres, ni que sigui en una petita escala, podem fer millorar les coses, ni que sigui per només una poca gent, podem triar, i crec que és una cosa que està dins de les dues històries, podem triar això, ni que sigui que petites coses ens puguin fer conservar l'esperança i no haver d'acabar d'una manera més fatal necessàriament.
How would you define the way you write? Or do you leave that to others to say?
Com definiries la teva escriptura, o prefereixes que siguin d'altres els que ho diguin?
The second thing. I was telling this story yesterday, or I don't know what day today is. Anyways.
Saturday, 2 days ago.
A lot of my science fiction has fantasy in it. A lot of my fantasy is set in the future. There are also often horror elements, and the Beneath the Rising series is also alternate history, besides being sci-fi and fantasy and horror. So yes, I write whatever I want, and then I send it to my poor agent, and he has to try to sell it to a publisher. And publishers like things to be in neat little boxes, usually. So we did get a lot of rejections initially saying, well, is this science fiction or fantasy? Where should we put it on the shelf? And we were like, this sounds like a problem for you, not for us. I really like elements of all speculative fiction, and I try to write all of them.
Bé, d'alguna manera escric ciència-ficció amb tocs de fantasia, i escric fantasia ambientada en el futur, i escric llibres que també tenen una part d'horror, i per exemple en Visita Rising també podríem parlar que parlen d'un futur alternatiu. Llavors d'alguna manera escric el que vull, li envio al meu agent perquè ell, pobre, faci tota la feina de barallar-se amb els editors, que normalment són gent que volen les coses com molt clares, com molt ben encapsulades, per poder dir-se què és això que m'has enviat, on ho col·locaríem a una llibreria, i bé, és el teu problema com a editor, fes-ho i arreglo. Jo senzillament m'agrada escriure això que escric i m'agrada poder incloure tots aquests elements de la ficció especulativa.
When I was doing your presentation, I was talking about your science background, which is very important also in your books. And actually, I was reading about your website, and you actually teach about that, how to use science in science fiction, don't you? So that's also a core part of the way you think about stories.
El teu bagatge com a científica és molt important en les teves històries. De fet, tens una sèrie de tallers on ensenyes a com escriure ciència-ficció amb un element de ciència, amb ell. Què ens pots dir d'això?
Yes, I actually love teaching that class. I've taught it a few times now. I hope I'm becoming known for teaching it, but what I love is to start from research. And research is, in a sense, like writing fiction. For writing a book, we start with a question we would like to answer, usually about human nature or the world or society. And for research, they also are starting with a question they would like to answer, and they're trying usually to come to a yes or a no. So when I research for my books, I use my scientific background in that way. I go usually straight to the primary research. I find papers. I try to look up, literary analyses on them. I roll everything into my fiction, and I try to find connections between the research that people are doing. And in my class, I try to do the same thing. But the big goal is not to just write another science paper. It's to write an interesting story with a real feeling world and with real characters. So that, I think, is the tough part after the easy part is over. And I always consider the research the easy part.
Bé, m'encanta la classe que faig. Espero ser molt més coneguda si segueixo fent-la, i m'agrada molt fer-la perquè d'alguna manera fer recerca o començar a fer una recerca científica és com escriure. D'alguna manera, quan volem escriure una història, ens fem primer la pregunta, una pregunta que pot anar sobre els éssers humans, sobre la societat en què vivim, i mirem de trobar-li la resposta a través d'aquesta recerca. Quan escric, amb aquesta recerca aplico el meu bagatge científic, faig una mena de recerca cap a les fonts primàries, sobretot, miro de trobar connexions entre totes elles, però finalment el que escric no és un article d'investigació, el que vull escriure és una història on hi hagi un món i uns personatges que interactuen molt bé entre ells. Aquesta és la part difícil, la part fàcil d'alguna manera és la de la recerca.
And when did the science stop and this speculative stuff come in? Because that must be a tough choice too when you're writing, no? Preguntar quan estàs escrivint, quan s'acaba la ciència i quan comença la part especulativa, perquè s'ha de triar, no? En quin moment dius prou de ciència i ara això no pot ser, però tant se val, no?
be hard sometimes, especially when you want something to happen in the story that the science doesn't support.
Coming back from the dead.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I switch over to fantasy. No. But in some cases, that's what I do, is I just say, you know, our science isn't advanced enough to understand this yet. But I try to, at least, make the science in my stories somewhat realistic. I'm not going to put something in a story just for the spectacle or to drive the plot forward if the science doesn't at least hint at supporting it. The problem with that, of course, is that, you know, science progresses. So maybe I'm writing something that could be possible 50 years from now, and you know, that's something I'm happy to put in a book, but I'm not going to be out here like that G.I. Joe movie where they're smashing through the ice and all the ice chunks start to sink. And I was so mad at that, I tried to leave the theater, and my friends had to hold me down in my seat. I was screaming, "This isn't science!"
Comenta la Premee que cada vegada és difícil en el sentit que segons quin element vulgui posar potser li sona que és una cosa no massa científica, no? Perquè potser la ciència no està tan avançada, o almenys no sembla que pugui ser una cosa tan realista en relació a la ciència, no? I tampoc vol posar res gratuïtament només per causar un cert efecte o perquè permeti avançar la història. Si bé sí que és cert que la ciència avança molt i que sí que és possible que el que ella escriurà ara potser d'aquí 50 anys sigui algo real, sigui algo que pot passar. Li encantaria haver estat la primera d'escriure-ho i no suporta segons quins efectes, com mencionava un exemple de la pel·lícula G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe, sí. Que no hem entès perquè parlava de gel i d'aigua i no som científics, per tant... What happened exactly with the movie?
If I recall correctly, because I only saw it once because I was so angry.
Was more than enough?
Yeah, more than enough. They blow up the bad guys' evil headquarters, which is on one of the polar ice caps, and all the ice starts sinking into the seawater. And I just, why? Anyways, in the movie, the reason they had the ice sink instead of float was so that it could hit the good guys who were in the water. But this is exactly what I am trying to avoid and what I try to teach people to avoid in my class.
Ara l'exemple ens queda més clar. Bàsicament, a la pel·lícula va anar a destruir el quartel general dels dolents, que està allà en una mena de casquet polar, i el fet és que quan el destrossen el gel no flota, sinó que s'enfonsa per d'alguna manera poder golpejar els que estaven atacant-lo. I clar, és una cosa que va treure una mica de pulla aquí.
The Lifeless Things is set in a post-apocalyptic world which is devastated by aliens. We don't know a lot about them, we just know that they call them they. And it's after this happened, and this anthropologist finds these letters, which are actually sources, historical sources, about what really happened. And it's a story about things that end and things that begin, isn't it?
Aquestes coses sense vida està situada en un món post-apocalíptic, on hi ha hagut una invasió alienígena.
I aleshores el que passa, ja ho tradueixo jo directament, si no seria una mica raro, el que passa és que això ha passat després, han desaparegut aquests alienígenes i queden els supervivents, que són molt pocs, i una de les protagonistes, que és una antropòloga, troba unes històries on s'explica què ha passat. I és una història, jo pensava que era una història sobre coses que acaben i coses que comencen, no?
I'm very interested in, well, I think this is obvious from my books. Sorry to all my fans. I'm very interested in what we call the end of the world. What does that mean, the end of the world, you know? In these lifeless things, for Eva, it doesn't mean the end of everything. It just means the end of her life to that point. It looks like the end of her family. And it means the beginning of a new life for her, new ways of living, new threats, new enemies that she didn't have to deal with in her previous life. And then from Emerson's point of view, there was an ending, and then for some reason, a beginning. And I kept thinking about history and the study of history and historians as a discipline. Why do we look? Like, why are we interested in studying the past? That all ended, and now we are doing something else. So why do we turn backwards to look? And I think people ask the same thing about physicists. They say, why are we looking into space? Why are we trying to see how the universe began? Does that tell us anything about how to live now? These are questions I don't have answers to. But I think about it a lot. I think fiction is a good way to look at what we consider an end and how every end is always a new door opening. It just may not have the same people walking through it. If that makes sense.
Bé, sempre he tingut molt d'interès en les històries que ens parlen de la fi del món, perquè realment què és la fi del món? En aquest llibre en concret per la Eva no és la fi del món realment, és la fi de la seva vida tal com ella l'entenia, i és un nou principi on s'ha d'enfrontar coses que abans no existien, una sèrie d'amenaces i una sèrie d'enemics. Per la Emerson, des del seu punt de vista, va haver un final i un principi, que és el que ella d'alguna manera intenta esbrinar com es va generar tot. La Premee ens comenta que no deixa de pensar sovint en la història i amb els historiadors, amb tota la disciplina, com aquesta gran cosa de per què volem mirar enrere, per què necessitem mirar enrere. Igual que els físics o els astrofísics, per què mirem a l'espai, què és el que volem entendre. Tot això, tota aquesta informació ens dirà alguna cosa que ens serveixi pel nostre dia a dia i bàsicament no tenim respostes per això.
Let's look back into your past. Because you told me before you started writing books when you were like 12, and you wrote lots of novels before being published. And actually, when you first published, they published a book that you wrote like 16 or 18 years before. So tell me a bit about that. How come you started writing novels when you were 12?
Vas començar a escriure quan tenies 12 anys, vas escriure molt i vas escriure moltes coses abans de ser publicada. De fet, el llibre que et van publicar va ser quasi 16 anys després d'haver-se fet. Com pot ser això? Què ens pots explicar d'aquesta època?
I was a nerd. No, I think it was just, there's some people that love books and just want to read books, and some people that love books and want to create what they love. So that was always me. I remember writing stories when I was very, very little. Almost as soon as I learned how to write, that's what I was doing. I wasn't writing my name on the wall or whatever. I was writing stories. And it was my hobby. It was how I relaxed. I would come home from school, I would finish my homework, and then I would open up whatever I was working on, and the way I thought of it, I would go hang out with my friends. I never took any, like writing classes or writing education or anything, because I don't think it occurred to me that I would need to study at a hobby. I was just having fun, so that has had to change recently. After I got my first book deal, I thought, I should really learn how to write. So I started signing up for writing classes and whatnot, and it was very, very strange to see that they were attempting to teach me the things I had been teaching myself from writing for decades. So I think I'm on firm ground here.
Bé, bàsicament sóc una friki, ens ha vingut a dir. Ens comentava com és cert que molta gent de ben petit comença a estimar els llibres i això fa llegir molts llibres. Ella també li passava això, però a més els volia escriure. I a més, així que des de molt petita escriure es va convertir en la seva afició. Recorda arribar a casa, fer els deures, i un cop fets els deures, agafar les seves llibretes i escriure. Per ella era un hobby i per això tampoc no havia fet mai classes d'escriptura, perquè no tenia sentit, era un hobby, era una diversió. Era divertit. I bé, des que van començar a publicar-la, això va canviar una mica. És cert que va pensar, bé, potser sí que començaré a anar a classes d'escriptura, però de fet d'alguna manera li resultava estrany veure com li deien què fer quan ella ja portava molts d'anys fent-ho.
Beneath the Rising, that was the first book you published? Yeah. But it was the 12th book you wrote, more or less? 11th, 12th? You don't know, okay. So what happened there? Because you finished that book in 2002, and it was published in 2020, wasn't it? So what happened during the 18 years?
Beneath the Rising va ser el primer llibre que em van publicar, però potser era el 12è llibre que escrivies. El vas acabar el 2002, però no el van publicar fins al 2020. Què va passar durant aquests 18 anys?
Yeah, this is a good question. I understand from my friends that this is not normally what happens. Is the way it's supposed to go is you're a writer, you decide you want to get published, you write the book, and then you try to make somebody publish the book. So what happened with me was I was a writer, I was a writer, I was a writer, I was a writer. I started writing short stories for pocket money, and then I became friends with writers, and writers are really bad for peer pressure. And somebody finally talked me into, trying to get literary representation and publish a novel, and I thought, so many of my existing novels are either incredibly terrible, unpublishable in my opinion, or unfinished. But Beneath the Rising was finished, and in my opinion, not that terrible. So I cleaned it up and sent it out, and didn't think too much of it because, I wasn't writing for a living. I had a real job. It was just something that I wanted to see if I could get it published. And if the answer was no, that was also okay. But the answer turned out to be yes. And then I was almost embarrassed to be publishing this book that I had finished when I was 20. I wasn't sure if I was a better writer by that point, but at the very least it was done. So that kind of got me onto the publishing treadmill where people are buying books and all of a sudden I have deadlines now.
Bé, és una bona pregunta, perquè això normalment no passa, no? El que passa normalment, segons m'han dit, és que tu decideixes escriure, llavors escrius i després busques algú que et publiqui. En el meu cas, jo el que feia era escriure. Llavors vaig començar a escriure històries curtes, vaig conèixer amics escriptors, bona gent, diguem, i aquests em van dir que potser el que hauria de començar a fer amb tot allò que havia escrit és mirar de buscar algú que em representés, que aquest algú ho enviés a una editorial o a diverses editorials mirant el què. Amb què em trobava? Que havia escrit moltes coses, moltes de les que havia escrit potser no eren lo suficientment bones o potser no estaven acabades, però Beneath the Rising crec que sí que era lo suficientment bona i estava acabada. Així que vaig fer 4 correccions, vaig posar una mica i la vaig enviar. Tampoc amb grans esperances de res, perquè no escrivia per viure, ja tenia una feina. Només tenia curiositat per veure si era un llibre que fos publicable. I bé, passada la vergonya, almenys el llibre estava fet i afortunadament es va publicar.
You talked about this earlier, but to get more into it, why do you write in general, science fiction, fantasy, horror? What do you get out of it?
T'agrada escriure ciència-ficció, terror, horror, què en treus de tot això?
Good news, now I'm having an existential crisis. Fun translating that. God, I don't know. Well, the small amount of money helps. It really is a small amount of money. I don't know. I have friends who tell me that they write as therapy because they have trauma or things in their past that they would like to get out into their books. For me, it never feels like that. For me, it always feels like entertainment. It always is the most fun thing. It's always the thing I want to do the most. And whenever I have free time and energy and they're happening at the same time and the cat isn't laying on the keyboard, that's all I want to do, is go into these worlds that aren't real and be part of the story. I guess it just speaks to my overwhelming need to feel like I am part of a story when the rest of the world is not really making me feel that way.
No sé si és una crisi existencial o no, però de totes maneres, el primer és que bé, sempre és ara mateix és un petit tema d'ingrés de diners, que també ajuda. Molta gent que escriu, molta gent que conec que escriu, sempre em diuen que per ells és com una teràpia, que els serveix com per desfogar-se el seu dia a dia, però en el meu cas no és així. En el meu cas és pura diversió, és la necessitat de passar una bona estona, és el que vull fer quan tinc temps lliure per fer-ho, l'energia per fer-ho, quan el meu gat no està assegut a sobre el teclat i em deixa fer-ho. I per mi, d'alguna manera, és entrar en aquests mons, que per mi són reals, estic creant aquests mons, són reals per mi, vull entrar en aquests mons i sentir-me part d'aquests mons, és la meva gran necessitat, perquè m'hi sento molt més allà que no en aquest nostre.
I would also like to add, I think another reason is that I have finally, at this age, discovered something that I'm good at. Because of course, when you're writing on your own, you don't know if you're any good or not. Nobody's reading it. There's no feedback. And now I'm actually getting recognition and validation, and these guys paid for me to come to Barcelona. There are actual benefits, and that's very strange.
And great reviews also.
Bé, ella també volia afegir que també finalment ha descobert a la seva edat una cosa amb la que és bona, que no sabia abans si ho era o no, perquè ella escrivia, però realment no arribava a ningú, i ara que li publiquen i ara que veu que sí que té un reconeixement, doncs això també l'omple molt, veure això.
Great. A couple of questions more, because we've been here for a long time already, but it's so interesting. For all the guys and girls who are out there wanting to write, how is a typical day for you, typical writing day? Because you have to combine your job and writing, or do you just write during the holidays? How do you work?
Per tots aquells escriptors que ens esteu veient, com funciona això? Com va el teu dia a dia? Com pots combinar la feina o a l'escriure, o potser només l'escriure? Com ho gestiones?
Well, I actually recently left my job because it was terrible and my mental health was suffering, unfortunately. But before that, what was happening was I would mostly write on the weekends. I just did not have the energy to write during the week, but the weekends would normally look like I would try to clear my whole calendar so that I would have uninterrupted time to write, because deadlines don't care if you're tired or not. So usually I would write for 3 or 4 hours in the morning, break for lunch, and then in the afternoon when I was starting to get a bit more tired, that's the time for research, for editing, for doing other publishing stuff like replying to emails, or doing interview questions, or writing blog posts or essays, or scheduling panels, or doing class curriculums, or for those who are interested in becoming a professional author, which I don't know if I am yet because I'm not really supporting myself via writing, let's say professional-ish, slightly professional, the publishing part of the job takes a surprising amount of time every week. I think if I sat down and added it all up, at its worst, maybe 20 or 30 hours. So you add that to 40 to 60 hours of work, plus the commute, there's no time to write. So yeah, definitely keeping writing and publishing separate is the only way I can do it.
Bé, ens comenta la Premee que actualment té més temps per escriure perquè no fa gaire va deixar la feina perquè li convenia per estar molt més tranquil amb tot, però abans d'això, a nivell de combinar-se amb la feina, clar, bàsicament l'únic temps lliure que li quedava era els caps de setmana. Llavors mirava de no tenir cap altre compromís els caps de setmana per poder dedicar almenys 3-4 hores cada matí a escriure, també tenint present els plaços d'entrega que tenia, i ja a partir del migdia i a la tarda també una part important que era tot el tema de recerca, de mirar nous continguts pel que estava escrivint, per editar els textos, a més tota la gestió que implicava poder escriure algun tema d'assaig, contestar els mails, preparar també les classes que ha de donar. Llavors, per tots aquells que vulguin ser d'alguna manera escriptors, escriure professionalment, ella es pregunta si ella també ho és o no, l'únic que els hi pot dir és que a banda de la feina, cada setmana li han de dedicar molt de temps, com a mínim 20-30 hores més a la setmana. Tot això només amb el tema d'escriure i més pensin també després en tot el tema de gestió del que has escrit.
And this is a very nerdy question for my part, but people also want to know what do you read? What are your influences? What are the authors that you talked about? Ursula Le Guin before. I'm sure that's one of your influences, probably. What else? Who else?
Ens parlaves abans de l'Úrsula Le Guin com una de les teves influències. Qui més ens podries citar?
Yes, definitely Ursula K. Le Guin. I started reading her when I was in maybe high school, so I was 14 or 15, very impressionable age. So she's, I think, one of my top influences. Certainly also Terry Pratchett, because I like the social analysis in his books, and he really kind of taught me, even in a funny book, an author shouldn't just be a mirror, reflecting the world. An author should be a factory, so taking in lots of information, taking in the world and processing it and creating something new. And he does that in every book, which I love. And Mervyn Peake, who wrote the Gormenghast trilogy, probably my favorite book series of all time, is also another influence, particularly in terms of his language and his total disregard for plot. It's just a beautiful, interesting world that is all vibes. I think he was my earliest introduction to surrealism, and so also China Miéville is also a big influence for the same reason. He doesn't care if he's writing something that doesn't make sense to us, the reader, provided that it makes sense to him, the author, and to the characters. He's just going to keep going. So I really admire that. He's a very big influence as well.
Sí, la Úrsula Le Guin i tant, vull dir, des que va conèixer-la als 14-15 anys, per ella és una de les tops, una de les més grans influències que ha tingut. També en Terry Pratchett, perquè en tots els seus llibres sempre ha trobat un gran component social, com des de l'humor podia agafar en cada llibre coses del nostre món i transformar-les i enviar-te-les de nou, amb aquest component social. També amb Mervyn Peake, Titus Grown, amb la saga Titus Grown, sobretot pel llenguatge que feia servir, perquè la va fer entrar d'alguna manera en algun tema de surrealisme dins del món fantàstic, i per la seva total manca de rigorositat d'alguna manera amb l'argument, cosa que també troba amb un autor que admira, que és el China Miéville, que d'alguna manera també moltes de les coses molt sovint no tenen sentit pel lector, però sí sembla molt clarament que tenen sentit per l'autor i pels personatges, i això ella ho admira molt.
Great. Bueno, ho deixem aquí. Premee Mohamed, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you. We'll do it again tomorrow, won't we?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Different questions or the same questions?
Oh, I haven't thought about that yet. I'm sure they're going to be different answers anyway. but honest answers. Recordo aquest llibre meravellós amb aquestes dues històries que són realment meravelloses, molt diferents les unes de les altres, amb molts punts en comú, però realment tracten temes diferents, incloses en aquest llibre publicat per Cronos, Mentides sobre la mort, amb la traducció d'Anna Llisterri. Gràcies per seguir-nos.